morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matty Taus. I get to be one of the pastors here at Epiphany Station, and today we get to talk about sex. Yay! Okay, well, some of you, as they were in the first service, might actually be excited to have this conversation, and some of you are now planning your exit and escape route, and some teenagers are looking at their parents and realizing at this point that it's a trap, and they had no idea it was coming. Today we get to have a conversation about sex because that's what we need to talk about today. We need to, during this entire teaching series, continue to lift the lid on some topics of conversation that we don't regularly find access to, not in ways that are actually supposed to be built into us finding health and finding relief from what would otherwise be maybe an oppressive topic. So we're going to talk about sex this morning, and we're going to talk about it with all inclination and all direction towards finding hope in something that is always supposed to have been hopeful. Now, sex is a weird conversation in any sort of realm. It's weird, so we usually kind of boil it down to some clinical things that we can teach in the classroom, or we make jokes about it, or we put it in movies, however we can to try and take the edge off just how weird it feels. But sex can be something that so very easily and so massively defines who we are. It certainly defines who we are as people and as people groups and as cultures. It can be so impactful and so important that your pursuit or other people's pursuit of sex can define how you dress or how you talk. It can mean how you shop, how you play, how you work, and how you vote. We're so uncomfortable with the idea of sex that we rarely find comfort in being able to express ourselves. Some of us, after years of sexual activity, still feel a little uncomfortable whenever it is brought up. And that can be incredibly frustrating. It can also be incredibly dangerous. Because when we choose not to talk about things, then we don't gain any understanding. We don't gain any comfort with it, so we choose again even more not to talk about it. And it can become a cycle. And for some, when things happen to them that they don't understand and they don't have a place to talk about it, it can become a cycle of shame and of guilt and regret. So what we want to do is we want to talk about it. Now, as we do talk about it, if you have any pushback, any feedback, anything that we kind of get into that you want maybe more information on, we would love you to use our connection card. It's a yellow card that you can find in stands at the back of the room and at the welcome station, and we'll be in touch with you this week if you wish. In fact, we talk about sex quite often here at Epiphany Station. About 6 months ago during the spring, we launched into a teaching series called For Better, For Worse. And Jackie, my wife, and I, we sat up here and we talked apparently for 45 minutes, it felt a lot longer, in which we shared what it was like for us as singles, but then as a young married couple, what it meant for us to be able to pursue sex God's way and how we have pursued it other ways also. We shared about our successes and our mistakes and our hurts and how to find freedom from those. So if you're looking maybe for a part 2 to this conversation, you can find that online at epiphanystation.com. We talk about how sex is supposed to be good, for our good, and how it can go from good to great. But we're talking today because that's not the norm. In fact, it's so much not the norm that many of us feel some of our greatest pain and hurts have been caused through our sexuality. Before I was lead pastor at Epiphany, I was actually the intern, which was a glorious position, and then I got demoted to youth pastor. And then, and in that role, and in this, I've had many conversations both with young people and older people that have a certain unique fear when it comes to the topic and conversation about sex. Fear that they're wrong. Fear that they don't understand. Fear that they don't know. And fear to talk about it with other people in case they feel threatened. We live in a culture and a society now that when the topic of sex comes up, it is more readily dismissed than anything. We have this blanket statement that we like to use for a lot of parts of our lives, which basically means I can do anything I want to do. I can pursue anything I want to. I can engage in anything I want to, and to heck with the consequences. The problem with that mentality is that any society that engages in anything, mentality of I can do anything I want to do, without talking about it, without questioning it, will more readily perpetuate some of the most harmful parts of society, most harmful parts of culture, most harmful parts of sexuality. So as we dig in this morning, I want to suggest that I know something about where you're at. I know something about some of you, and I know something about what you've experienced when it comes to sex. I know that some of you in this room have had sex that you're not proud of. I know, like me, some of you have shared a one-night stand that you're not proud of. That you've engaged in sexual intimacy with someone who you're no longer with, and that has caused that relationship to disintegrate, and it's been maybe now that you're strangers, or maybe even worse. I know that some of you in here this morning, as couples, sex is a point of contention continuously, unmarried and married couples. I know that some of us in this room struggle. They struggle with the adult entertainment industry, with pornography. I know for a fact that none of us want to talk about that none of us want to talk about masturbation, that none of us want to talk about prostitution. I know for a fact that all of us, to one degree or another, have sexual desires. It's part of who we are. I know that every single one of us, we have views on sex. But I also know that none of our views are perfect. None of our views are perfect. None of them come into absolute congruence and application with what is the very best thing that could ever be experienced. And I know that all of us could do to learn something more about why sex exists in the first place. What we're going to do today, and all I hope to accomplish today, is to give you an opportunity to challenge the preconceived notion that we get to do anything, that we can do anything with anything, and that instead we might want to look a little bit closer at what we're doing with sex. I'm going to be using the Bible as a backbone to start our conversation this morning. And like I said, if you have any pushback or feedback, please let us know via our connection cards. I want to start us off with something that God had written specifically to this question of what sex is for and what sex is not for. In a letter written to a group of people in the city of Corinth, it comes out and it starts like this. With this very same argument we hear today. He said, "You say, we say, I'm allowed to do anything. But not everything is good for you. And even though I'm allowed to do anything, I must not become a slave to anything." God wants to speak specifically to people who desire with their lives to love God and to love people. He's saying to them, look, you can do anything. You actually can. You can do anything, but not everything is good for you. Not everything is good for you. So therefore, when you do something, know that there could be negative consequences. Now, we usually understand consequence and choice in most other arenas. I mean, you can go jump off a cliff. Not anywhere around here. You'd have to drive a ways to find one. But you can eat McDonald's every day. You can yell at people from street corners. You can. But there will be consequences to your actions. And what God is starting out in this conversation by saying is no different with sex. With every single one of your sexual choices, both positive and negative, there will be consequences. The greatest negative of consequences would be that you would go where you don't want to go. You'd be taken where you don't want to be. And some people actually find themselves enslaved to their sexual pursuits. The conversation continues with the rebuttal, with an argument, in which you say that food is meant for the stomach and stomach is meant for food. Basically meaning one fulfills the other, so why not do it? He said, you were made, but you can't say that your bodies were made for sexual immorality. He says that they were made for the Lord and the Lord cares for your bodies. So that argument, that mentality that I can do whatever I want is then fed by the really just animalistic, well, I have a stomach that needs food, so I eat. I have lungs that need air, so I breathe. I have a sexual appetite that I want to fulfill, so I do. That's the argument, and that's how it plays out with I can do anything. God simply says, well, you can do anything only if all you ever desire is your own personal satisfaction. If you just desire your own personal pleasure, that's fine, and you can do anything and cause all sorts of harm that you wish. But God desires to have a different kind of conversation, one where he can say, I made you, so that means something. Now, there's a couple of words that he uses in this little bit of chunk, this letter, that jump out to us, that pop out. Those are the words sexual immorality. There's a term we're not comfortable saying out loud, because sexual immorality usually drums up pictures in our heads of people on picket lines with banners, berating other people for their sexual choices and inclinations. That's how we view the use of sexual immorality. Very rarely do we consider that God brings up sexual immorality for our good. And he does bring it up over and over and over again. Jesus brings it up over and over again to talk about how sexual immorality poses a very real threat. And somewhere along the line, we've twisted that to mean that's our weapon. Sexual immorality is just a term that we can use to weaponize what we think is right and to legislate it and tell people how to live their lives, instead of thinking, well, God is trying to speak to the people he cares about and how he cares about them. This is why he brings up sexual immorality. He brings it up because he says that your bodies, they were made for the Lord. And the Lord cares about our bodies. It's a very different kind of conversation from the usual ones you'll hear from the pulpit in which we talk and yell about purity. Very rarely is the conversation, it's actually just genuinely because God cares about you, that he tells you there is a pathway in which sex can be used badly, that not all sex is good, that he would have the conversation out of care and affection, not so he can ban something that you want to be able to pursue, but he can say simply, I warn you against it. You can do anything, but not everything is good. He then takes it very specifically, or the author Paul takes it very specifically into an instance in which he says, look, should a man ever join his body, which is part of Christ, to a prostitute? Well, never. Should a man join his body? Never. Because don't you realize that when he joins himself to a prostitute, he becomes one body with her? For the scriptures say the two are united into one. So Paul, this guy who's been inspired, who's writing to a very specific group of people who have a problem with prostitution, who have a problem of using prostitution as a form of worship, he says, this is sexually immoral and this will go badly for you. And this very specific instance of prostitution, paying someone to have sex, making sex transactional, not something that it is not just the only way in which we find ourselves being derailed from its purpose. We're starting to see it more often in non-committed sexual interactions, in the use of pornography. See, all this is going on, and all these things are happening, and Paul's trying to speak to it, and God's trying to speak to it, because whether you want it to or not, sex is doing something. Whenever you engage in it, whoever you engage in it with, sex is always trying to accomplish a goal. And that goal is to bind us to another human being. That's why sex was given, so that we would be able to bind ourselves, that we would be able to entangle and entwine ourselves permanently to another individual. Now, those of you who enjoy sex as the way it's supposed to be, you maybe experienced that. With your partners, you continue to grow closer and closer together. But I'm also going to say, knowing that some of you stand in the same boat as I do, that when you've had sex with someone that you're no longer with, it's still done the same thing. It's still made a connection there that you maybe didn't even want to make in the first place. A connection that's then difficult to shake off, difficult to forget. Because an unhealthy connection made in an unhealthy way will always lead to unhealth. So God says, sexual immorality, it's a thing. And it's a thing that can happen, and it's a thing that I don't want you to have to go through. So he tries to give direction, he tries to give warning. Continuing on straight into the Corinthians, he says this, he says, I want you to run from sexual sin, because no other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. God is saying, nothing will affect you as negatively as sexual sin. Nothing will ever do something as bad to you as that will do. It's quite a bold statement. It's a bold statement that Christians have kind of taken on faith for a couple of thousand years that he was probably true. He's probably right. But we live in an age of proof. We live in an age of research. We live in an age where we want to be able to see, is that true? And we are starting to see that it is. As we start to gather psychological and medical data, we start to see that sexual immorality can actually cause some of the most damaging things to you and people around you that you will ever see in your life. There's an amazing organization out there that's called Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug works very specifically when it comes to exposing what happens when we use pornography. What it happens and how it completely rewires your brain to start to desire something that is unrealistic, to need something that can never be satiated. How it actually forms an impossibility of connections to be made with real human beings, and how when more and more people are using pornography in society, how there are more and more trends of violence and assault and abuse. What we're starting to see is that when we choose sexual immorality, it has an incredibly negative effect on us individually, on us relationally, and us as a society. And what we live in right now is a world that says, you can do anything. You can do whatever you wish. And then somehow we are surprised that we live in a culture, we live in a society, we live in a nation that's starting to be known for its misogynistic sexual assaults. We're starting to be known across the world for rape culture. We're starting to be known by hashtags like Me Too, where more and more people are coming out and saying, look, there are a lot of people out there that do not understand healthy sexual connection, and therefore there are a lot of people who are being hurt by it. The male-female divide in our country is growing wider and wider. More and more people are having sex than ever. More and more people are having sex with more and more people than ever. And as a result, more and more people are feeling hurt. More and more people are feeling used, and more people are feeling worthless. And it's because sex has lost its place. It's lost its purpose. It is no longer the thing that we look to leverage the greatest level of intimacy and trust in a relationship, not something that we use to bind us to another human being. Sex is most often used in a self-centered way, and it becomes self-harming and dishonoring and divisive, and it can spiral and it can split. And you and I, we sit here, we talk about it today, rarely considering the impact we individually, personally take. But this is not a conversation about how other people choose to use their sexuality. This is what God is saying is, if you want me in your life, you want me honoring you, you want me blessing you, then this is our conversation between you and I. And you will choose on a regular basis either to perpetuate the continual decline of what sex is going to be, or you will fight to return it to where it should be and what God has intended it for. The way that we will fight that is when we choose one of two statements. When we come in towards the constant knock of sexual immorality asking for us to respond, we will either choose, I can do anything, or I can do what is right. That I can do what is right and honorable for me. That I can do what is right for my partner. I can do what is right for my family. I can do what is right for daughters, sisters, and wives, and sons and brothers and husbands. That I will speak about sex. I will use my sex. I will teach that sex is supposed to build two people together. That it's supposed to bind them permanently. It's supposed to unite human beings. Not tear them apart, leaving them wondering who they even are. Not dividing families. And not causing such societal harm as it does. It's been a very difficult topic of conversation to develop this week. Not slept very well. Because no one really wants to talk about this or how bad it's getting. But if we're ever going to do anything that honors God, that loves Him, that loves people, we have to choose to take a personal interest in how we will use sex. So I'm going to challenge every single one of you. Doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter your relationship status, doesn't matter your sexual activity or lack thereof. I'm going to challenge you to do something. And this next step, it's not just for today. It will be there every single day for the rest of your life. For us to do anything, to change anything, we have to choose individually to pursue a healthy sex life. To pursue a healthy sex life, whatever the context of your life currently looks like. The reason we must do that is because God seems to deem it very important that we run from sexual sin. That we run and flee the damage because it will cause the most damage out of anything we could ever do wrong. To be able to pursue a healthy sex life, I believe we must be willing to be wrong. We must be willing to admit that maybe we don't have the perfect constructed view of what sex is in our relationships, in our marriages, or for myself. So you have to be willing to review your view of sex and what that looks like in your life for the future of your kids, your family, and society as a whole. If you're willing to review sex, to review what it's supposed to be, then we can start to see change. You might simply be a person who doesn't want to cause harm. You might be a person who desires to seek love and to love other people. Well, how's that been going? How have the results been of how you're currently engaging in sexual activity? Has it been that you're finding those binding, amazing relationships that are holding you closer and closer together? Or has it been causing pain and distraction and dysfunction? Maybe there's something that's not quite right in your view yet. Now, maybe you're a person who wants to love God and love people with it all, with everything. Point, At that point, God gets to say something. If you're going to say you're going to love him, then he gets to have say into everything, including your sex life. And how would you say your sex view matches up with his? Is it right on the same page? Are we in full agreement? Or there are some areas that you hold for yourself and that maybe you and your partner will decide that one, or maybe you and the internet will decide that one. The key for us making a change is being willing to talk about it, to talk about this, to talk about that, to be able to talk to someone. If you don't have anyone to talk to about your sex life, that's one of the reasons, among many, that the church even exists. To be a place where you can actually find those relationships and connections to have the tough talk. If you've been at Epiphany for a while and you're not meeting people, you're not connecting with people, maybe it's time to invest in that. Maybe to find another couple kind of in the same place or further ahead in the line than you. Maybe to find another individual in the same state of life that you can pose questions to that maybe could hold you accountable to your sexual behavior. We're supposed to be able to help each other. We're supposed to be able to move forward in our love for God and love for people. If you need to talk to someone about sexual immorality, how it's affecting you, affecting a loved one, how the sexual immorality of another person has affected you, then we also, as a staff and a team, we're not afraid to talk to you. This is one of the reasons we'd love you to use connection cards this week. You can drop them in anonymously or you can put your name in. We'll pray for the anonymous ones. We'll get in touch with you if you want us to. If we're willing to review our view on sex, then and only then can we choose to be more honoring. And we can choose to honor our God. We must choose with our sex lives to honor God, to be able to say, this is not just mine. This is something that was given to me. Something that was kind of brought out as God finishes this conversation with the Corinthians is the truth about who you really belong to and if you can really do anything. He said this to them. He said that you do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price. So you must honor God with your body. Jesus came to this earth to shine a light into every corner, every area, to highlight everything. Not so he could point to it and shake a finger and tell you how bad you are, but he could show you who you actually are, how much you're actually worth, what was paid for you, who you're born to be. And the truth of the matter is, you weren't free. You're not cheap. So don't let anyone treat you cheaply. Jesus thought you valuable enough to pay his entire life for your existence, for your joy. So we get to then live a life where we know that we're loved by God, know that we can be forgiven, know that we can be healed and restored. For sex is a powerful and important gift that has been given to us that we might handle it with responsibility, that we might use it as it was intended to form us to that one person in our lives, to not share it with anyone else, not to keep it only for ourselves. This is how we choose to honor our God. This is how we choose to honor ourselves. And we must have this conversation simply because for some of us, it is sexual sin that is holding us back from sexual joy. It is ours or it is the sin of another that is holding us back and is killing love, that is undercutting value, and that is postponing our desire to actually find that person we can spend our life with. Because as God said, you can do anything. But he also said that you were not meant for just old anything. You were meant for the most beautiful expression of life. You were meant for the most beautiful expression of sexuality. You were meant for so much more than anything. Your life was given to you so that you might glorify God, that you might be something to be pointed to and say, look how amazing and honorable and glorified this person is by how much they are using what they have been given to point to God. I don't know of a greater direction, I don't know of a greater purpose in life than to be used to glorify the creator of everything. In a moment here, what we're going to do together is we're going to take some time to remember just why honor and glory is due to God whatsoever. We're going to take something called communion. Now, communion can mean many different things to you, depending on your past, your experience of church and other things. So let me tell you what it means to us. Communion is something that Jesus said to do regularly as a family. He said, if you want to follow me, you want to love God and love people, take communion, because communion will remind you of something. It'll remind you that a price was paid for you. It's exactly what he means when he speaks in Corinthians and said, you are not free. You are bought for with an expensive ransom, a heavy price. Jesus paid what was needed to be paid so that you could be free from darkness, walk away from sin, be reconnected to your God. We take juice and bread, which is at the corner of the stages, and we take that to represent the full blood and full body sacrifice Jesus was willing to give, a physical sacrifice for glory and honor. And we take that because we want to give physical sacrifice for glory and honor. If you want to take that with us this morning, you can head down the center aisle, grab it from the corners, and head back to your chair. And you can take that whenever you want. Our music team will be up here leading us in a song of worship. And you can take that whenever you feel led to. But I challenge you to take a moment this morning to entertain this question. Are you meant for honorable purposes? Are you meant to glorify God with everything? Well, then does that include your sexuality? The question of the conversation is for you alone, to understand what your body is meant for and how God has tried to direct you to use it in ways that will bring you and your relationships health. We should be able to walk out of conversations about sex remembering who we are. We're born to be children of honor, children of light, children of our God. Let me pray. Father God, we thank you that we can bring all sorts of pain and fear, and we can share it with you openly as we remember how much you value us, that we connect that value you've laid on us to what now we can know. We can know about ourselves, we can know about you. So God, I ask you to help us deal with our sexual sin, the things that we've done. Help us to deal with this. Help us to bring these things to you. Help us to find the healthy, right way to use this gift. God, I ask for all of us that are single, that you will give us the ability to understand what it means to use sex the right way. God, I ask that you would help all of us that are in a relationship to be able to know how to honor each other by the use of sex. God, just take us back to school. Teach us again, teach us new, teach us fresh what it means to be willing to submit our sex lives to you and to see beautiful and amazing and glorious things come from it. In Jesus' name, amen.